The 2020 George Floyd riots, cities burning, rioters control the streets, and police are ordered to stand down. This wasn't just chaos, this was a blueprint. I'm Allan Paul Roberts, author of The Globalist Plan to Collapse Everything to Usher in a New World Order. And today, we're exposing the globalist plan to collapse the second pillar of society, security and police protection. We're talking about the deliberate dismantling of law and order in America. And not only in America, but in Europe and Australia as well. In a few minutes, the UK's Catherine Edwards joins me to reveal what she's witnessed firsthand. The same pattern, the same endgame. What you're about to hear will challenge your assumptions about the world we're living in. Welcome to the Globalist Plan to Collapse Everything podcast, where we expose the globalists' sinister plans to collapse society so they can build a new world order upon the ashes. This is where we shine the light, expose the darkness, and push back against these evil tyrants. This isn't about conspiracy theories. This is where we analyze facts hiding in plain sight. Are you ready? Let's dive in. Remember CNN calling the riots fiery but mostly peaceful? Let that phrase sink in for a moment. Fiery but peaceful? Do those words even belong in the same sentence? Here's what mostly peaceful actually looked like. Remember those days? Cities burning, police stations overrun, billions in property damage, federal buildings under siege, and law enforcement told to stand down while prosecutors refused to charge the perpetrators. The question is, was it organic or was it orchestrated? And speaking of contradictions like fiery and peaceful, here's something you may have forgotten. Kamala Harris was once tough on crime. That's right, in her book, Smart on Crime, she boasted about San Francisco's prosecution record. Quote, "We are sending 3 times as many offenders to state prison than we were in 2001. But by 2020, she'd become a big supporter of the Minnesota Freedom Fund, an organization that bailed out criminals, including rapists and accused murderers. On page 110 of my book, you'll find a QR code linking to Kamala's involvement with the so-called Freedom Fund. It looks like she discovered which direction the wind was blowing and did what her globalist handlers told her to do. She became soft on crime. So when America's cities were facing the worst civil unrest in generations, what did the big blue city mayors do? They defunded the police. Think about that. In the middle of riots, looting, and violent crime, they reduced the police. That wasn't incompetence. That's too stupid to be stupid. Which brings me to an important point. When it's too stupid to be stupid, it's a strategy. This was a deliberate strategy to weaken law enforcement, undermine public safety, and normalize chaos in America's largest cities. The evidence? They told us exactly what they were doing while they did it. But the defund movement was just one piece. To truly collapse law and order, you need to control the prosecutorial system. Enter George Soros, the most dangerous man in America. In a New York Post expose, journalist Matt Palumbo documented Soros' systematic dismantling of the justice system. He describes the Soros strategy this way: pour tens of millions of dollars into district attorney races to elect prosecutors who will be soft on crime. Sound familiar? Fund hundreds of activist media organizations that normalize crime and demonize police. Place allies from major news organizations like Reuters, NBC, The Washington Post on the boards of his organizations, and then bankrolled so-called fact-checkers to silence dissent. The result? District attorneys who refuse to prosecute any shoplifting under $1,000. Prosecutors who drop charges against violent offenders. And a justice system that protects criminals and punishes victims. Friends, it's pretty simple. It's like this: open borders plus corrupt district attorneys equals collapsing law and order. Think about what the Biden administration delivered: 10 to 20 million migrants from 160 countries. No meaningful vetting for criminals, gang members, or foreign operatives. Deliberate placement in cities where police have been defunded and where Democrats will pick up seats in Congress. And district attorneys under globalist control who won't prosecute. This wasn't a policy failure. This was strategic destabilization. And remember, they have to collapse the system before they can build it back better under the tyrannical system of their new world order. Are you still skeptical? Let's not forget what happened when migrant teens attacked New York City police officers in broad daylight. That assault was captured on video. It was clear, undeniable, and violent. You probably remember seeing it. And what was Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg's initial response? He declined to prosecute due to what he called a lack of evidence. I mean, you got to be kidding me. Let me repeat that. Video evidence of a violent assault on police officers, and the district attorney said there wasn't enough evidence? That's not justice. That's opening the gates to the barbarians. Now, here's where it gets pretty interesting. The Council on Criminal Justice recently reported something remarkable. Homicide rates in America's 40 largest cities have dropped to the lowest level since 1900. That's a 125-year low. What changed? There's only one thing that really changed: ICE enforcement. The current administration unleashed immigration and customs enforcement to target and deport violent criminals, and the results speak for themselves. The lowest violent crime rate in 125 years. But here's the uncomfortable truth: this could all be reversed overnight. If the next administration returns to open border policies and prosecutorial corruption, we'll be right back where we were: cities in chaos, police under siege, citizens unprotected. So let's step back and look at what we're really facing. We're facing two Americas: one that wants secure borders, functioning police, and the rule of law, and another that embraces the globalist blueprint: open borders, hamstrung law enforcement, prosecutors who won't prosecute, and a controlled collapse of the system to usher in a new one. And again, the new one is known as the New World Order. This isn't partisan politics. This is civilizational collapse. And if you think America has it bad, you need to see what's happening in the rest of the Western world. Catherine Edwards joins us again today. She's one of the clearest voices emerging from the UK, a country where police protection is collapsing even faster than in the U.S. blue cities, and where speaking the wrong opinion can literally land you in prison. Catherine hosts the Live, Love, Learn podcast and the Catherine Edwards podcast, where she interviews thinkers worldwide on freedom, consciousness, and the hidden forces reshaping our societies. She doesn't just repeat official narratives. She speaks of what's actually happening on the ground. Today, we're going to talk to her about the state of policing and public safety in the UK, the explosion of censorship and political imprisonment, where Britain is heading and what this means for America, and anything else she'd like to discuss. Because if you want to know what the globalists want for America, look at what they're trying to achieve in the UK. Links to Catherine's work are in the show notes. How you doing, Catherine? Good to have you back.
Thank you. It's great to be back. I really enjoyed our conversation last week. And you're right, we are the example in the UK not to be followed by anyone across the globe. Learn and don't go down the same route.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of all in this together, and we can feel the pressure. The pressure's being mounted against us to try to take us down a certain path. So we have to resist. But let's begin by painting a picture for our American audience. What does public safety look like in the UK right now in 2026? If I were walking through, say, London, Manchester, Birmingham today, what would I see that would maybe shock or surprise me compared to maybe 10 years ago?
It's very, very interesting, and I've heard quite a few prominent people like Tucker Carlson talk about it. And actually, if you actually walk through London, you'd feel really good at the
Okay.
moment. So one of the issues we're seeing is what's being reported and what you're seeing in real life are two very different things. Now, of course, like any big cities, we have got problems, and there are definitely no-go areas. But if you look at our statistics, murder, violent crime is down, sexual offences are up, um, shoplifting and things are up, but things like murders are down and significantly. I think our figures, I think, are zero point 0.8 homicides per 100,000 people in the UK. So we've got this huge reputation of knife crimes off the scale. And yes, it is bad. I mean, I live in quite a small town, and a teenager was stabbed dead last week, which we've never had in this area before.
Mm.
So it absolutely is happening. But I think the real thing is that the perception is that we're not safe anymore because we don't see policemen on the streets anymore. They're too busy arresting people for online speech and hate speech as opposed to actually keeping people safe and surveilling. And that, again, this disparity in terms of what we're told and we see on the news and what we see in real life is making people feel really uneasy and feeling unsafe. So even if the murder rates are down, people absolutely feel not safe, not secure. They can't trust the police anymore. And there's constant sort of psychological warfare, clips, outrage, and engineered panic,
Mm.
which also comes into the online, the new acts they've got to arrest people for online speech, which I'm sure we'll speak about.
Yeah, that's incredible, the, online speech. So you mentioned, no-go zones. How big are these? How many of them? I mean, does every major city have them? Just give us some sense about what that looks like.
Certainly, in most major cities, there would be areas you wouldn't walk on your own at night. There would be gang areas, etc. If you were a tourist going to London, I think you'd be very surprised how great you felt. There are areas that, particularly in some of the other big cities outside London, where people are not absolutely no-go areas. But the thing is, Alan, I think for me, the key thing what we're seeing is we're not seeing people don't trust the police anymore. They don't trust them to keep them safe. They don't trust them to be on the right side of the law.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, when they're not doing their job, their traditional job, and instead going after people for free speech violations, so called. Even that is, I would think, very disorienting. I mean, it's like the police have lost their way, or not really the police. Probably those telling the police what they need to do have lost their way. Here in America too, normally the police are people you can trust. I grew up trusting police, and I never had a big fear of corruption, even though I knew there was some. When I say corruption, I just mean corruption in terms of their mission. Their mission's being corrupted, and that's a very that's a disturbing thing to see wherever it happens, and it happens here in the U.S. as well, in these blue cities where they choose to allow certain crimes to go unpunished, particularly burglaries up to $1,000 of merchandise pulled from a store shelf. In many of the blue cities, that's not anything they punish. They look the other way.
So, I mean, that is quite unbelievable. And I think the sad thing is, I mean, everyone you speak to is going to have a different experience. On a personal level, I've yet to have a bad experience, touch wood, with a policeman. So I have been since 2020 on a lot of the large protests up in London, and the police that I've come across have been absolutely fantastic. But like everyone else, I've seen the footage of really bad behavior of police as well. So I think it's like anything. Of course, it's a few bad apples that give everyone a bad name. And I think most of the corruption is obviously coming from the higher levels. I mean, you've
Hmm.
only got to look at the news
Yeah.
that's coming out this week with the Epstein files to see that unfortunately a lot of it's the higher levels that set the tone, and these policemen either go along and comply or not. Of course, there's a few bottom apples at the lower levels as well. But I think the case of the online hate speech laws, the laws have been tightened up dramatically, and most people have actually heard about a lady called Lucy Connolly here. Unfortunately, back in July 2024, there was a horrific killing of children at a dance classes where they were stabbed, and it was
Yes.
absolutely awful. And there was obviously, understandably, a huge public outcry, and Lucy
Hmm.
Connolly posted something not great at all on X, but took it down straight away afterwards. And she received nearly a 3-year prison sentence for that. And yet, other rioters from other races that actually went out and caused criminal damage got suspended sentences. So they are making examples of people. We hear a lot of publicity about how many people are having knocks on their door, are getting into trouble for online, and that is definitely true. But I would also say it's quite a small community of people that are really speaking up about all sorts of things in the UK very publicly. And none of us have had any issues yet. Now, I don't want to tempt fate. So again, Alan, it's this fine line of like, isn't this the absolute playbook of the controllers? Make an example of some people, publicize them globally, and then a lot of people will be too scared to speak up. So, of all the people I know posting pretty controversial stuff on social media, I don't yet know anyone personally who's fallen foul to this, which is interesting.
That's good. Good to hear. Yeah. Just going back to the 2020, the George Floyd riots, and that seemed to spread worldwide, the BLM kind of riots that were going on back then. Yeah, I mean, in the United States, it was kind of terrifying to see, cities burning, police standing down, police being defunded, a big defund the police movement, where the not only the number of police were reduced, but they were reduced in their effectiveness because they were afraid of being criminalized, or they weren't being supported and backed. Um, did the UK go through anything similar to that going back that far? Was there any kind of uh, push to defund the police or to downplay crime?
Nothing like what you experienced back then. However, more recently, I would say in the 2024 incidents where it really blew up when these children were murdered so viciously, I think that was the nearest we got to the equivalent. And then we saw a huge backlash of people coming out on social media blaming the migrants coming into the country, which we talked about last week. So that was our closest to that. So no, not in terms of the defunding, although why are we not seeing the massive police presence on the streets? That's interesting. We certainly didn't have the BLM issues back like you did then, but in 2024, we really saw the start of what we call over here two-tier policing. And they were definitely dealing with different ethnic groups very differently. And there was a lot of publicity about that. So there was certain that the police seemed very scared to criticize and take harsh action against certain ethnic groups. And then, of course, back in 2024, 2025, we really saw coming out the whole rape grooming gangs scenario, which had been going on for years and years and had been a complete cover up. And that, with the stabbings of the children, all escalated, I would say, at the end of 2024 in terms of this real two-tier policing coming to the forefront and people really losing confidence that they would deal with the real offenders and actually really take harsher action against the people that were seen to be talking up and were therefore being judged as racist.
So at this point, given that you went through that evolution and pushback and all the publicity and everything, how would you say today, how are British police responding at this point to migrant-related crime? Are they finally being allowed to enforce the law equally, or is it still like a two-tiered system?
I think there's still a two-tier system, but surprisingly, over the last few months, it's gone completely quiet on these issues, which is very, very interesting. And really, what's raised to the forefront has been a lot of publicity and a lot of videos circulating, particularly in the alternative media online, of people coming and having knocks on the door from policemen, which sometimes result in arrests and sometimes don't, for hate speech online. So we're seeing a real tap down on enforcing new hate speech laws online. And recently, just like they had in Australia, the PM, Keir Starmer, I can't say his name without making an awful facial expression because no one really believes he's in control at all. I mean, the man looks absolutely terrified every time he opens his mouth. So goodness knows what they've got on him, obviously a lot. But what they're really doing is looking in now to control what they call the exposure for the young people and bring in having to have an ID to be over 16 to get on most of the social media platforms, which is what they tried to bring in Australia with limited success, I understand. But of course, if you've got to prove your age that you're over 16, that means we've all got to prove our age, which is digital ID by the back door. So what I found so interesting, Alan, is how we get these waves and suddenly it dies down and they're on to the next thing. So having had really from sort of mid 24 until probably the end of last year, the end of 2025, a huge focus on the two-tier policing, suddenly that agenda has gone quite quiet and we're now onto the online safety side of things, which again ties in with the bigger plan. Okay, we haven't quite managed to bring in the digital control in that way. So we're going a different route now and trying the next one on our list.
So, we talked about earlier in the show about how these George Soros-backed district attorneys in America refuse to prosecute shoplifting under roughly $1,000, depending on the city. One city might set it at 950 or 1,000, but it's around $1,000. Does the UK have any policies that you can see where certain particular crimes are just not um, that they don't go after certain types of crimes for whatever reason? Have you noticed anything like that changes from the past?
The main thing that we've noticed is not to do with the shoplifting and things like that. It's to do with the ethnic. They're talking about the sexual exploitation by certain ethnic
Okay.
categories. And that's still very, very controversial. And that is still definitely not under control. And people have to be very, very careful how they talk about that because that is one of the real no-go zones. And certainly still we're not getting the prosecutions that we should do. And it's going to be interesting with everything that's coming out now with the whole Epstein tapes and things to see if that raises it even more to the fore, because we're very happy to throw Prince Andrew, although he's no longer a prince, he was stripped of that title last year. We're very happy to throw certain public figures under the bus, but not discuss the real elephant in the room. And I think the main issue with the policing we're seeing now is the whole ethnic discussion is still very, very much not being applied uniformly. People are scared to talk about it. You know, you think about if you see a crime being committed and you've got to describe the perpetrator, there's only certain words you can use to describe that. And we've still got a real stigma around that. So people are still very, very unhappy about the sexual exploitation discussions and how those are being handled. And that definitely is still an issue with two-tier policing.
Sure, and I think at one level that's actually a more difficult problem because one's economic, shoplifting, and it also can drive businesses out of business. So I mean, it can cause major problems. But I think when it comes down to what you're talking about, that becomes an issue of personal safety. And I would think that psychologically that, depending on where you live and if you know anyone that's had that happen to them, that could be very kind of terrifying and difficult to deal with if you're in those regions.
Very much so, and I think it is a real issue, and unfortunately, it's quite hard for people to judge, Alan, how much of this is a real threat and how much is propaganda, make people think it's a threat, and to basically request more surveillance for on the grounds of safety. And, we all know about false flags, and false flags doesn't mean an event doesn't happen, but it means it might be orchestrated for a particular outcome.
Sure. So, in terms of the free speech crimes, let's say,
Mm.
um, who decides what speech is criminal? I mean, is this coming from like actual legislation, judicial interpretation, law enforcement discretion? I mean, like who frames this up and what are the rules? Do we know what the rules are?
It's so interesting. I would say all of the above. So they absolutely have brought in new legislation. I'm just looking to see in my notes if I've got the name of it all, but they've brought in new legislation which they are absolutely applying much, much stricter now. But equally, the way that it's applied in the cases like Lucy Connolly, who I discussed before, it was absolutely ridiculous. I mean, she was supposedly prosecuted for inciting violence, and it wasn't at all. There's no way, I think she said something like, if it was up to me, I'd burn all the hotels down. But this was a childminder mum. No one was going to incite violence after what she said. So I think it's all of the above, and it's very obvious to most of us that there is a strategy that's being applied, coordinated, just a bit like the COVID one was, where you've got the politicians, you've got the judicial and the policing that are all deciding they're going to make examples of certain cases to try and scare everyone into compliance. Having said that, at the moment, we're seeing a huge amount on social media about all sorts of topics that would fall under that, and very few arrests. But they could be collecting information because, of course, they can apply this retrospectively. But we all know the rules that they're bringing in are not to try and re educate people how to be more responsible humans online. It's purely to bully people and control them and make them more compliant. And that has been very obvious from the examples that they've picked.
Interesting. So, do you have any political, I'll call them political heroes, or major media voices or movements in the UK of high profile people who are choosing to take the risk of like actively pushing back against this, especially politicians? Are there anybody? I mean, are there a few, a handful? Is it a big thing? I mean, how hard are any politicians visibly pushing back against all this? Have you seen it?
Very few, and the ones that are, the main one that would come to mind would be Andrew Bridgen, who was a fantastic politician that was the only one that really stood up and stuck his neck above the line in COVID, and he subsequently got removed from his seat and so is no longer a member of parliament, but he's still speaking up far and wide. There are a few others that are trying to do little bits, but they don't get any coverage and their actions are very much hidden and suppressed. So, in terms of the political figures, pitiful. And we've got a situation here with the head of the Reform Party, Nigel Farage, who everyone was sort of touting as our version of Trump. But actually, actions speak louder than words. And you've only got to look at how he changed his mind over the COVID era, that people don't really trust him. I think it's people are clutching at straws, and it's a bit like what is the best of a bad bunch. On the other side of things, we have had some sports stars that have spoken up. We have had some commentators. Of course, good old David Icke is probably the most famous of all of those, and he is continually really speaking up and putting together fantastic interpretations of what's going on because his knowledge is so much deeper than most of the rest of us. We've got Neil Oliver, we've got a footballer called Matt Letizia who, lost his job. We have got people that are speaking up. But they're few and far between because unfortunately they are very much silent. So as soon as they do start to speak up, they're sacked from their mainstream jobs. So they have to go into the alternative media. And unfortunately, most of the alternative media, I don't know if you're finding this, is a little bit that you're speaking to the already converted. I mean, most people who listen to mainstream news have never even heard of Rumble.
Right. Oh, that's so true.
So
Yeah, it's a tiny fraction.
it,
I don't even want to know how small that percentage is because I know it'll be depressing. But
yes,
that's
yeah,
so true.
it's this ridiculous conspiracy theorist hat that gets put on all of us. I mean, even in my friendship groups where, I'm a biologist and a lot of my friends work for Big Pharma, and it's just, they're lovely, lovely people, but completely closed. As soon as you start talking about any of this, you have the conspiracy theorist label put on you and they shut down. And it's very interesting to see the psychology, how brilliantly it's been applied to see these people not engage in critical thinking at all.
Yes, because if they would engage in critical thinking, over time they would come to see that the so-called conspiracy theorists have been right on so many things. I
Yes,
mean, there's jokes that go around, I have to find new conspiracies because all the old ones came true, that kind of thing. But that's for the people who are paying attention. The other one I like is what's the difference between a conspiracy theory and a conspiracy fact? And about 6 months, so
exactly.
that's just all kinds of things like that.
We spoke in the last episode about how we need to help each other out
Yes.
and drop the blame. The whole point about being an adult is to be able to stand up, admit I was wrong, and now, in the light of new information, I'm going to change my mind and take different decisions. Because the definition of insanity is for us to keep all doing the same thing and expecting different results. All the time, our current political systems are in power. They can change the rules anytime they want, and we're
Hmm.
all a bit stuff. We've seen that with your borders. We've seen that with our borders. We've seen that with the policing in Black Lives Matters. We've seen it in the policing in the UK with the racial clashes. And we have to stop being so easily to be played. And it's a difficult one because until more people are prepared to say, okay, I was wrong, I don't really see how we get out of this mess.
Do you think that in the UK you're near a tipping point of actually turning it around when it comes to free speech, just for example, being a major thing, a major issue? It sounds like the resistance is pretty strong, but yet a lot of people are also being silent, and the politicians, from what you're saying, aren't really speaking out much. But do you think the between the sports stars or maybe the people on TV or anything like that, do you think it's approaching a tipping point, or do you think you're still far from that?
I think we're still quite a way away. I think the problem is as soon as someone in a prominent position starts to speak out, they're virtually wiped from the internet.
Gotcha.
And it's very difficult, however much they're trying to speak out, for them to get a voice that can be heard outside the echo chambers of all of us.
In the US, it seemed to me the big turning point was Elon Musk opening up the X platform, acquiring Twitter and then opening that up. That had a big impact here because certain voices that were crushed everywhere else on social media were, for the most part, I'd say 90%, given free reign. There's still some people who are still highly filtered on X, but not
Yeah.
that many. And I just wondered, is X a popular platform in the UK? Is that having any impact at all in terms of, free speech?
It is very popular, and that's a very good point of yours. But I think most people who are really into the free speech don't trust Elon Musk as far as you can throw him, and don't trust X. However, I think there's a lot of people wondering how much of that, a bit like a lot of people getting their YouTube channels back this year,
Hmm.
how much of that is a data collection exercise with the AI surveillance that's going on to monitor who's saying what. I think a lot of people who have been in this game for a while have a severe mistrust of X, but are still using it because what alternative have we got?
Yeah, my theory is that because he opened up X when no one else would open up their platforms, that he put pressure on the other platforms to start opening up. And because at one level, it's still a business deal. If X is sucking all the, traffic out of the room, then pretty soon Google, YouTube, they almost have to respond or just keep losing market share. So I just curious about that. I agree. It's such a, you have AI on all these platforms, they're scooping up data.
Yeah.
I don't know that we can get away from it, but I am glad that at least X is there as a way to get the word out, and for a lot of people, it seems pretty unfiltered, so at least there's some hope there.
So, in one respect, these are platforms that are funded by these people, and we are choosing to comply or not with their rules and regulations to use them. So, in one respect, I can see that. But we all know that history shows us very clearly that they can change the guidelines like this,
Yes.
retrospectively change the guidelines. And with the free speech rules that we've got in the UK, and is definitely being followed in other places as well, the fact of the matter is your history's there forever. So if they change, 1984, the
Yeah.
2030, they
Mhm.
back and they can see everything that we've done. And I think we need to be aware of that, not let us stop us trying to get the message out, but also do it with our eyes open. And that's certainly my viewpoint on these platforms. I am grateful they're there, because if not, we'd be all completely stuffed in this modern world. But equally, I think there's an awful lot of manipulation and false information. Of course, with AI now, and the amazing voice generation, video generation, is anyone with virtually no computer skills can make a fake document, they can make a fake video. So it's going to get harder and harder for people to discern what's the truth.
So true. Well, thank you, Catherine, for all your input. I really appreciate it. It's always great to be able to talk to somebody and find out, what is really happening versus what the news is telling us is happening in other places. So, really appreciate your input. And just tell us again how we can find you, where we can see what you're doing, and take in your great content.
Thank you so much. Well, probably the easiest place is my website is catherineedwards.life, Life, and you've got links to all my social media platforms on there. But I'm on Rumble, YouTube, Substack, and Instagram and X. And, pretty different platforms censor different things. Come and join the conversation. Allan was a guest with me just before, at the end of last year. We had a great discussion. And I think the more of us just support each other, spread the word. We don't have to agree with everything, but we do have to support each other and get these messages out to more people.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Catherine. That'll do it for us. Please remember to check out all my podcasts at rumble.com/The Globalist Plan, and head over to globalcollapsebook.com, where you can see lots of interviews and order a signed copy of my book, The Globalist Plan to Collapse Everything to Usher in a New World Order. That'll do it, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to catch us next time.